The largest Ponzi scheme in history wasn't uncovered by regulators. It wasn't uncovered by banks. It wasn't uncovered by investors. It collapsed because a liar ran out of cash. December 11th, 2008. A retiree in California came home from dinner. He opened his email. A message from his cousin. Subject line, bad news. He read it. Then he read it again. His life savings were gone. Every dollar. $2 million. And he had never heard the name of the man who took it. The man wasn't hiding. He was one of the most respected figures on Wall Street. A market pioneer. A former chairman of NASDAQ. A man trusted by banks, charities, billionaires. Trusted even by the people whose job was to investigate him. The fund that took the retiree's money called itself risk-free arbitrage. Extremely trustworthy. That's what they all said. The most successful con artists don't sell greed. They sell certainty. The smartest investors in the world saw something they couldn't explain. A return that never lost. A strategy no one could replicate. A balance sheet that made sense if you didn't look too closely. And nobody looked. Not because they were fooled, because looking would have ended it. What they were buying, the calm, the comfort, the relief of not having to think, was worth more than the truth. Then when someone finally checked, the $65 billion in client statements had never existed. When FBI agents finally confronted him, they asked a simple question. Was there an innocent explanation? He thought for a moment, then said, no. The strange part wasn't that he confessed. The strange part was that for nearly 2 decades, nobody had forced him to.
Fixture on Wall Street, Bernie Madoff, 70 years old, arrested by the FBI.
Charged with running a $50 billion Ponzi scheme. This is one of the biggest fraud cases ever.
The FBI alleges Madoff recently confessed he had been running basically a giant Ponzi scheme for years.
It was the worst thing that ever happened to us. In 1 second, our whole lives disappeared.
Venting my anger at Madoff doesn't help me.
Ruth Madoff said she and her husband, Bernie, tried to kill themselves after he was busted for running a $50 billion Ponzi scheme.
His name was Bernard Madoff, but everyone called him Bernie. In 1960, with $5,000 saved from working as a lifeguard, he founded a small securities firm in Manhattan, Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities. He started it from a folding table in his father-in-law's accounting office. By the 1980s, that firm had become one of the largest market makers on Wall Street. Madoff was a pioneer of electronic trading. When most of Wall Street was still running on telephones and paper tickets, he was building the digital plumbing that the modern stock market still runs on today. In the early 1990s, he served multiple terms as chairman of the NASDAQ stock exchange. By 2008, his firm ranked in the top 1% of all American securities firms by capital. $700 million in firm capital. He sat on advisory committees for the SEC. He gave lectures at business schools. He was a fixture at industry conferences. The firm was a family business in the most literal sense. His brother Peter served as the firm's chief compliance officer. His sons Mark and Andrew ran the market-making floor. His wife Ruth managed the back office. To anyone looking at Bernie Madoff from the outside, he was not a man who could possibly be running a fraud. He was a man who had helped build the system that was supposed to catch fraud. But there was a second business, on a different floor, behind a locked door. A business almost nobody inside the firm knew existed. Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities had 3 businesses under one roof: market making, proprietary trading, and a separate investment advisory operation that almost no one else inside the firm was allowed to see. The advisory side ran from a different floor of the New York office. According to the SEC's own complaint, Madoff kept the financial statements of that business under lock and key. He was, in the SEC's words, cryptic with other BMIS employees about what the advisory business actually did. The auditor for that multi-billion-dollar operation was a 3-person accounting firm in a strip mall in upstate New York, Freeling and Horowitz. For comparison, firms of similar size typically used one of the Big Four accounting firms: KPMG, Deloitte, PwC, Ernst & Young. Madoff used 3 people in a strip mall. In January of 2008, the advisory business filed its mandatory disclosure with the SEC. The filing reported $17 billion under management and 23 clients. That number was a fiction. Through a network of feeder funds spread across 4 continents, Madoff actually had thousands of underlying investors. But on paper, to the regulators, he had 23. Inside that secret advisory operation, one man ran the day-to-day mechanics. His name was Frank DePascali. He had started at the firm in 1975 as an 18-year-old kid from Queens with no Wall Street experience. By the 1990s, he was the lieutenant of the largest financial fraud in American history. The legitimate business and the fraud lived in the same building. The people running the real business never saw what was happening upstairs. Madoff told his clients he was using a strategy called split strike conversion. He would buy a basket of S&P 100 stocks. He would hedge with options to limit downside. Occasionally, he would move funds into treasury bills when he didn't like market conditions. It sounded sophisticated. It sounded reasonable. And in his own plea allocution in 2009, Madoff admitted that he never made a single one of those trades. Not for years. For decades. There were no S&P 100 stocks. There were no options hedges. There were no treasury bill positions. Every client statement, every monthly report, every trade confirmation was fabricated. Here is what actually happened. Client money came in. It was deposited into a single bank account at Chase Manhattan, later JP Morgan. That was the entire mechanism. When old clients wanted withdrawals, Madoff paid them out of the same account, using the new client's money. New money paid old money. That was the trick. That is the entire trick. It is the oldest financial fraud in the world. It has a name. Charles Ponzi gave it that name in Boston in 1920. In Frank DePascali's own confession years later, he admitted what was happening on that upstairs floor. No purchases or sales of securities were actually taking place, he said. It was all fake. The fake trade confirmations were generated by a computer program. DePascali and a small team would feed it the desired returns for the month, and it would manufacture historical-looking trades that would have produced those exact numbers. Backdated, printed, mailed. Some of the trades were entered as if they had occurred on days when the actual stock market was closed. When SEC investigators eventually came calling, DePascali had a system for that too. He kept fake documents in a refrigerator. The cold air aged the paper, made it look like it had been sitting in a filing cabinet for years. Years later, academic researchers Bernard and Boyle ran the math on what Madoff was claiming his strategy had produced. The return pattern was mathematically impossible within the system. It was not a sophisticated fraud. It was bookkeeping. The sophistication was on the surface. The engine was a single bank account. The advisory business found its first clients in the Jewish community in New York and South Florida, the Palm Beach Country Club, the 5 towns of Long Island, the synagogues of the Upper East Side. This is called affinity fraud. When a member of a community vouches for an investment opportunity, other members of that community trust it more than they would trust a stranger. Madoff did not have to convince anyone himself. His existing clients did the work for him. A father told his son. A son told his college roommate. A rabbi told his congregation. They called him Uncle Bernie. He was grandfatherly, soft-spoken. He wore conservative gray suits. He never raised his voice. The most powerful piece of his marketing was that he refused to take new clients. Madoff isn't accepting investments right now, maybe next year. The waitlist was real, and the waitlist was the product. When the average investor finally got in, it was a relief. They'd been let into something exclusive, something only the smart money knew about. The returns landed every month, 10%, 12%, sometimes more, in every year, in every market, in every macro environment. In 2000, when the dot-com bubble collapsed and the S&P 500 fell 10%, Madoff's clients earned positive returns. In 2001, when the market dropped further after September 11th, Madoff's clients earned positive returns. Year after year, decade after decade, the line on the chart went up. The list of who trusted him reads like the index to American post-war prestige. Steven Spielberg's Wunderkinder Foundation, Kevin Bacon and Kira Sedgwick, Sandy Koufax, John Malkovich, Larry King, Zsa Zsa Gabor, Mortimer Zuckerman, the publisher, Fred Wilpon, the owner of the New York Mets, Yeshiva University, Hadassah, MIT, NYU, the Boston Red Sox owners, and the Elie Wiesel Foundation. Wiesel was a Holocaust survivor, a Nobel Peace Prize laureate. He'd invested almost everything his foundation had with Madoff because a friend had introduced them, and the friend had been investing for decades with no problems. When the fraud was revealed, Wiesel called Madoff a thief and a scoundrel. And then he said something more interesting. He said he had never doubted Madoff for a moment. That was the design. The fraud's reach went international through feeder funds. Fairfield Sentry, based in Connecticut, channeled $7 billion to Madoff alone. Many of the people invested through these funds never knew his name. The fund did not say it. The fund did not have to. This is where the thesis of the story starts to land. The investors with Madoff were not stupid. They were not even, in most cases, particularly greedy. What they were buying was peace of mind. The calm certainty of a number that went up. The relief of knowing someone else had figured out the math. The comfort of belonging to a group that knew something the rest of the market did not. Looking too closely would have ended all of that. So nobody looked. Until one person did. And he figured it out in 4 hours.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me here to testify before your committee today regarding my 9-year-long investigation into the Madoff Ponzi scheme.
In 1999, a small investment firm in Boston called Rampart Investments was trying to compete with Madoff. A partner named Frank Casey asked his colleague Harry Markopoulos to reverse engineer Madoff's strategy. Markopoulos was a quantitative analyst, a finance guy with a math background. He spent 4 hours looking at Madoff's reported returns. Then he walked into Casey's office and said it was impossible. There is no version of the strategy Madoff is claiming to run that produces those returns. The math does not work. In May of 2000, Markopoulos submitted an 8-page complaint to the SEC's Boston office. He explained the mathematics. He showed his work. He recommended that the SEC investigate. The SEC declined to pursue it. In April of 2001, the SEC formally closed the file without an investigation. Markopoulos was not done. In October of 2005, he submitted a longer, more detailed memorandum. The title was, "The World's Largest Hedge Fund is a Fraud." He laid out approximately 30 separate red flags. He showed that the volume of S&P 100 options Madoff would have needed to trade to hedge his portfolio exceeded the total volume that actually traded on the public exchanges. In other words, if Madoff was doing what he said he was doing, every other options trader in the world would have noticed. None of them had. The conclusion in the document was direct. This is a Ponzi scheme. This time, the SEC investigated. The investigation was conducted by examiners who later admitted in testimony that they had limited Ponzi scheme experience. They focused on the wrong question. They asked Madoff to explain the inconsistencies in his returns. He explained. They wrote down his explanation, but did not verify it. The SEC's own Inspector General would later conclude in a 477-page post-mortem that the agency had every opportunity to discover the fraud and did not. The Inspector General said the most basic step in any Ponzi scheme investigation, which is verification through an independent third party, was something the SEC never actually did. In 1992, the SEC had actually investigated an accounting firm called Avellino and Bienes that had been raising money to invest with Madoff. They focused the entire investigation on Avellino and Bienes. The SEC was in the building. They missed it. Years later, JP Morgan's internal compliance team identified red flags in Madoff's account activity. The bank quietly reduced its own exposure to feeder funds invested with him, but never filed a suspicious activity report with American regulators. In 2009, after the collapse, Harry Markopolos testified before Congress. He said the SEC had been given everything they needed to stop the largest financial fraud in history. He said he had gift-wrapped and delivered the case to the regulators, and they could not be bothered to conduct a thorough investigation. This is the moment where the thesis sharpens. This fraud did not survive because Madoff was a genius. It survived because the people whose job was to find it had reasons not to. The SEC examiners were deferential to a former NASDAQ chairman. The feeder funds collected fees on every dollar they sent him. The wealthy investors did not want their best-performing investment to be discovered as fake. The banks earned fees on the accounts. Markopolos was not ignored by accident. He was ignored on purpose, by everyone who would have had to dismantle their own assumptions if they had listened to him. The SEC had the math, the whistleblower, the evidence, and still missed it. This wasn't the last time institutions ignored a fraud. It is one of the many downfalls we investigate. Now into the collapse architecture. In September of 2008, the American financial system began to come apart. Lehman Brothers, a 158-year-old investment bank, filed for the largest bankruptcy in American history.
And financial markets from Asia to Europe are doing their utmost to prevent Monday from turning from dark to black.
AIG, the largest insurance company in the country, had to be bailed out by the federal government to avoid a complete collapse of the global insurance market. Credit markets froze. The stock market dropped 20% in a month.
The center ring is obviously the credit markets.
And the credit crisis worsened overnight.
People panicked. When people panic, they want their money back. Across Wall Street, investors started pulling out of every fund they could. Hedge funds, private equity, mutual funds, and Madoff. A Ponzi scheme has one structural weakness. It requires more new money coming in than old money going out. Because there is no real investment, there are no real returns. The only way to pay redemptions is with deposits. By the first week of December 2008, Madoff was facing approximately $7 billion in redemption requests. He had roughly $200 to $300 million left in the account, 2% of what he owed. He tried to buy himself a few more weeks. He told employees he was going to pay year-end bonuses early. He wanted to distribute the remaining cash to family, friends, and select staff before the entire structure collapsed. On the morning of December 10th, 2008, his two sons, Mark and Andrew, came to his office. They worked at the firm. They'd grown up around the firm. But they worked the market-making floor, the legitimate business, separate from the advisory operation that ran one floor above them. Bernie Madoff told his sons that the advisory business was, in his words, one big lie. He told them it was, in essence, a giant Ponzi scheme. He told them he had a few $100 million left, and he intended to distribute it before turning himself in. Mark and Andrew left their father's office. They went to a lawyer. The lawyer called the FBI. That night, the agents began preparing for an arrest. You were already wondering if the sons knew. The trustees sued them, pointing to the impossible returns in their own accounts. But those were the same fake statements every victim received. No criminal charge was ever filed. They even shared a single lawyer, something no defense attorney allows if a client is exposed. The evidence that they knew is the same evidence that fooled everyone, which makes it proof of nothing. The fraud had run for at least 17 years, possibly 30. It did not end because anyone found it. It ended because the cash treadmill stopped turning. On the morning of December 11th, 2008, FBI agents went to the penthouse apartment of Bernie and Ruth Madoff on the Upper East Side. The lead agent told Madoff they were investigating possible securities fraud and asked if there was an innocent explanation. Madoff said no. The criminal complaint filed that day records his exact admission. He told the agents he had paid investors with money that wasn't there. He described himself as broke and insolvent. He said it was all just one big lie. The FBI arrested him on the spot. The SEC filed an emergency civil action seeking an asset freeze the same morning. Over the next several years, 14 more people would be charged. His brother Peter, the compliance officer, Frank DePascali, the lieutenant who ran the machine, the operations chief, the secretary, even the strip mall auditor. DePascali cooperated and gave the most detailed account of how the fraud actually worked. On March 12, 2009, 3 months after his arrest, Bernie Madoff pled guilty in federal court to 11 felony charges: securities fraud, investment advisor fraud, mail fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, false statements, perjury, false filings with the SEC, theft from an employee benefit plan. He pled guilty without a plea agreement. That is unusual. A plea without an agreement gives the defendant no benefit at sentencing. Some legal analysts believed he did it to protect his family from prosecution. On June 29, 2009, in a Manhattan courtroom, Judge Denny Chin sentenced Bernie Madoff to the maximum sentence, 150 years in federal prison. The forfeiture order was $170 billion. Both were symbolic numbers. A sentence greater than he would live, a forfeiture greater than any asset. Judge Chin's remarks are part of the historical record. He called the fraud staggering, the breach of trust massive, the crimes extraordinarily evil. The reckoning was total. It came 9 years after the first formal warning, 16 years after the first missed investigation. Every person sentenced in 2009 could have been stopped in 2000 or in 1992. The system worked at the end. It failed everywhere it actually mattered. Steve Hymoff, from the intro to this video, sold his condominium in Oakland. He cut back on everything he could think of.
I just stopped going to restaurants. I stopped buying clothing. I stopped going on vacations. I stopped going to movies.
No more restaurants, no more vacations, no more new clothes. He was 62 years old when his retirement was wiped out by a man he had never heard of. He told reporters years later that he had contemplated suicide in the first weeks after the collapse.
I came very close to suicide for at least a year. It's been very emotionally exhausting. There's an element of post-traumatic stress syndrome.
His fear was not the immediate present. His fear was being old and poor in America. which he said was not a thing that worked out very well in this country. Michael DeVita was 58 in December of 2008. He had been planning to retire the following year. His mother, Emma, had a retirement savings invested with Madoff through the same fund. They were both wiped out together. Michael returned to work. He worked for 10 more years. He finally retired in August of 2018.
I retired in August of 2018, 8 years later than I expected, on less than a third of what I expected to retire on.
Years later, he said something that has stayed with everyone who has covered the human side of this case. He said there were a lot of people back at that time who felt that the investors with Madoff got what they deserved, that the returns were too good to be true, and therefore the investors had taken advantage of the system, and now they could not complain. He said, "Ha-ha, we gotcha."
There was a lot of feelings back at that time that people who were invested with Madoff, quote, got what they deserved, that the returns were too good to be true, and therefore you took advantage of the system, and you know what, ha-ha, we gotcha.
The truth is that most Madoff victims were not the Palm Beach billionaires the public assumed. They were teachers' pensions.
But included in that list are pension funds and retirement funds, each of which may have had tens of thousands of members.
Hospital endowments, family trusts, charity foundations, Holocaust survivors. They were people who had handed their money to a financial advisor and received a statement once a month confirming everything was fine. And then, the wreckage extended into Madoff's own family. On December 11, 2010, exactly 2 years after his father's arrest, Mark Madoff hanged himself in his Manhattan apartment. He was 46 years old.
When the oldest son of the disgraced imprisoned New York City apartment, dead of an apparent suicide.
His 2-year-old son was in the next room. Andrew Madoff, the younger son, was diagnosed with mantle cell lymphoma not long after the collapse. He died on September 3, 2014, at the age of 48. In one of his last interviews, he told a journalist that he believed the stress of his father's discovery had accelerated the progression of his cancer. He never spoke to his father again.
I'll never speak to him again.
After December 10, 2008. Ruth Madoff was forced to leave the penthouse. Reports surfaced years later that she and Bernie had attempted suicide together on Christmas Eve of 2008, less than 2 weeks after the arrest. They each took a handful of pills. They both survived.
I mailed and it was Christmas Eve. That added to the whole depression. We took pills and woke up the next day.
She lived in a series of smaller and smaller apartments after that.
Ruth made another move in 2012, this time heading back north to Old Greenwich, Connecticut.
Eventually, she settled in a small rented house in rural Connecticut, near her surviving family. Bernie Madoff died in prison on April 14, 2021. He was 82 years old. The official cause of death was a combination of kidney failure and other chronic illnesses he had developed during his incarceration. He had served 12 years of a 150-year sentence. The court-appointed trustee, Irving Picard, has spent the years since the collapse recovering money. As of May of 2026, the trustee has recovered approximately $15.4 billion on behalf of direct victims. The Madoff Victim Fund, which compensated a broader pool of victims, including those who invested through feeder funds, completed its final distribution in 2024. It paid out $4.3 billion to 40,930 victims. Most victims will receive an average of 93% of their proven losses. That is more than almost any major fraud victim has ever recovered in American history. It is, by financial measures, a success. But there is a thing about losses that cannot be put back. The decades, the retirements that were planned and never lived. The years Michael DeVita worked when he should have been with his mother. The years Steve Hymoff lived afraid. The Christmas dinners with the extended families that had invested together, where uncles stopped speaking to nephews and cousins stopped speaking to aunts, because everyone wanted to know who had brought Bernie in. The trustee can recover most of the money. The trustee cannot recover the lives that were planned around it. In his 2018 interview, Michael DeVita was asked whether something like Madoff could happen again. His answer was direct. I am positive that it will happen again. After Madoff, Washington set out to prove him wrong. In December of 2009, the SEC rewrote its custody rule. No more self-reporting. No more locked filing cabinets. No more advisors acting as their own auditor. In July of 2010, Congress passed Dodd-Frank. Title IV eliminated the exemption that had let hedge fund managers operate largely outside the SEC's view. Section 922 created the Whistleblower program. Report a credible fraud, and you could collect up to 30% of the penalties. If that program had existed in 2000, Harry Markopolos would have been owed hundreds of millions of dollars for being right, for being ignored. The SEC rebuilt its enforcement division and created a system to centralize the tips it used to lose. And in January of 2014, JP Morgan paid $2.6 billion over the Madoff account. The bank admitted it had identified the red flags internally and chosen not to report them. These were real changes. The architecture did change, but the people didn't. In 2012, Alan Stanford was sentenced to 110 years for a $7 billion Ponzi scheme run out of Antigua. It had been running, undetected by the SEC, in parallel with Madoff's, throughout the entire period of the Madoff investigations. While regulators hunted one Ponzi, an identical one sat untouched the whole time. In 2022, FTX collapsed. Billions in customer funds had been used for purposes the customers never believed they were funding. Different technology, different generation, same promise of, trust me. In February of 2025, a retired couple in Covina, California, Peter and Diane Hatta, lost $845,000 to a man impersonating a postal worker who told them the FBI was investigating them for shipping illegal firearms. They sent it over several months in cryptocurrency. They were exactly the kind of people Madoff used to target. Different victim, different scam, same psychology. The custody rule did not stop Alan Stanford. The whistleblower program did not stop FTX. The rebuilt enforcement division did not stop the Hatta family from wiring their savings to a man with a fake federal badge. Every reform fixes the mechanics of the last fraud. But fraud has never depended on mechanics. It depends on something older. The desire to believe. That someone else has already checked. That someone smarter has already done the math. That certainty exists. It doesn't. Michael DeVita told us it would happen again. He wasn't talking about the law. The audience changes. The technology changes. The paperwork changes. The human mind doesn't. When Steve Hymoff was asked, years after the collapse, what he had been told about the fund his family was invested in, he gave a short answer. It was described to him as risk-free arbitrage. He was told it was extremely trustworthy. That, he said, was all he knew. He did not ask more. That is the line. The mathematics that exposed the fraud was not hidden. Harry Markopolos handed it to the Securities and Exchange Commission 3 separate times across 5 years. The options volume calculation that proved the strategy was impossible could have been done by any first-year MBA student with access to a Bloomberg terminal. The independent verification step that the SEC's own Inspector General said would have ended the fraud at any point between 1992 and 2008 required a single phone call to the depository trust company. None of this was secret. People did not fail to verify. People chose not to verify, because verifying would have meant losing the peace of mind. And peace was the product. You were watching this and thinking, you would have looked. You would have noticed the returns that never failed. You would have asked who the auditor was. You would have wondered why the wait list was so long. You wouldn't have. No one did. The same mindset that is telling you right now that you would have caught Bernie Madoff is the mindset that is protecting you from checking the things you currently believe. Think about your own portfolio, the fund you put your retirement in because someone you trusted recommended it, the crypto wallet your friend has been telling you to convert to a different platform, the leader you have decided is honest because the alternative is too uncomfortable, the institution you are still loyal to even though something feels off, the relationship where the numbers don't add up but you keep not checking. What are you holding right now whose math you have not run? Bernie Madoff did not invent the Ponzi scheme. He did not even improve it. What he sold was something older and more durable. He sold the relief of not having to think. He sold the calm of belonging to a group that already knew. He sold the certainty that someone smarter than you had figured it out, and that as long as you stayed inside the circle, you would be safe. That was the marketplace he was running, and the marketplace is still open. It is open right now. It will be open tomorrow. And as long as we want to be its customers, someone will come along to sell us what we are asking for. Power isn't built on greed. It's built on exploiting the need for certainty. In ruin arrives the moment looking is no longer a choice. If this investigation changed how you think about trust, about the things you haven't checked in your own life, share it with someone who needs to run the math. The case study on fraud architecture is available at the link in the description.